Hopefully you loaded up on Texans in week 9. Who are the plays for week 10? The Football Guys DFS show has all your cash and GPP plays for this week's main slate. We're going to start it off like we always do with the games of the week. And I want Devin to lead us off here. Devin, who are your games of the week?
I think there's a couple. I hate bye weeks so much. It's like, let's just get through the bye weeks. Let's get all these teams playing. I'm tired of rookie quarterbacks. Like, let's just focus in on like good football. And we're not there yet, but we're getting close. So I think Cincinnati Houston's going to be interesting. What Houston team shows up after their big offensive explosion. The Chargers versus the Lions could be interesting. The Lions coming off a bye. They do get David Montgomery back, which we'll talk at the quarterback section a little bit later, but that hurts the passing attack quite a bit. And you know, what do we do with like some of these Jacksonville versus the 49ers? Jacksonville's pass defense has been horrendous. They're allowing, I think, close to 300 yards passing per game over the last, 275 for the season, and since week 4 they're at 300. So, what do we do there? I think that's pretty interesting. And is Brock Purdy going to get right? But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Phil, do you have other games you're watching?
The only ones that Devin didn't mention would be Commanders Seahawks has a 45.5 point total. I think there could be some interesting plays from that game. And then I have mild interest in Falcons at Cardinals. It's a middling total, but we've got Kyler Murray coming back, so that's an interesting wild card on this slate.
It's a bird game.
And then of course, just the Cowboys side of Giants Cowboys. The Cowboys have a slate high 27.5 point implied team total. There's some worries there. Do you play for a blowout? Do you not? So I'm sure all things that we'll get to tonight.
I think the only Pollard.
God, it's been such a struggle with Pollard. But at the same time, week 1 was about his only good week against the Giants. So you'd have to think that at some point it's going to turn around. I think him
and Michael Thomas are on my ban list, and I will not be convinced otherwise.
I don't blame you at all. I think they are on mine as well. I think the only other one that I kind of have an eye on is Tampa against Tennessee, like that being the pass funnel that both of those teams tend to be, and the way that we saw the explosion for Houston last week, and Will Levis is very priced lowly, and that would be quite a bit of a shock, I think, if the Buccaneers got shredded by rookie quarterbacks back-to-back, but I think that is one that it seems like could turn into shootout. But I think you guys did a great job. Those were all the top ones on my list as well, and those would be the ones that I would be targeting. Let's dive in for cash games. Let's go through quarterbacks. Phil, who are your quarterbacks for cash games?
So there's 2 guys that are on an absolute tear coming into this week that I want to play in cash, but I can't seem
Tommy DeVito.
I can't seem to fit him just yet. Tommy DeVito actually fits just fine, but Joe Burrow at 6,800, it kind of seems like we could pencil him in for the 300-yard bonus and at least 2 touchdowns. Over the last 4 games, the Texans have allowed 329 passing yards to Desmond Ridder, 353 to Derek Carr. They allowed Bryce Young's most efficient game of the season, and then last week 265 and 2 to Devin's boy Baker Mayfield. So it seems like Jamar Chase is going to play. He was at practice today, so that's a feather in Burrow's cap. And even though he'll be missing T. Higgins, I'm sure that he'll be fine this week. And in fact, it might even be that T. Higgins sitting out opens up some of the value that we need to get up to a Burrow. Or the other guy that I was eyeing was Dak Prescott. He feels a little bit riskier for cash despite the back-to-back 30-plus point games. The Giants did make Sam Howell and Josh Allen look pretty terrible recently. The flip side of that coin is that the Cowboys defense is going to put Prescott and the offense in really good and advantageous positions throughout that game as far as scoring chances go. But maybe it is the week that the touchdown variance flips back in Tony Pollard's direction, and he gets to enjoy it. And then, as I alluded to in the open, the implied score in this game is something like 28-11. So, like, what if it's Cooper Rush and the B team mopping up in the fourth quarter? That could put a damper on things too for Prescott. So I'm hoping for either of those guys, but if I can't get up to him, Brock Purdy at 5,700 looks okay. I can't bring myself to do Baker Mayfield for 5,100 in cash, even though he is actually the top point per dollar value at the position, according to my projections. I know Devin's going to mute me,
You're gonna
but
say we're
he
getting
had
muted early this week.
listen, he's more than 3x his current salary in 6 of his 8 games this season, and each of his last 3. Tennessee is not a great matchup, but Tampa Bay's at home, and it's easier to pass on the Titans than run.
Are you done yet?
I listen, if I flipped over the
The
cards,
answer
and
is
my
Joe
opponent,
Burrow, and like let's just move on. Find a way to
all right,
fit him in
fair,
cash,
fair enough.
and just like we don't need to name 7 quarterbacks here. Like it's just super simple. I mean, he's in a prime spot. We can go through the GPPs, but you know we saw last week where Burrow's healthy. I mean, he's back. He's ready to go. Yeah, T. Higgins is questionable. I don't really care. So to me, it's Burrow. If you wanted to spend down, don't. But you could go with a guy like I do think Will Levis at 5,300 is at least interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Sam Howell might be the only other name that but I agree. I think that it's Burrow. You just plug Burrow into your lineup and you move on. And that means that we're going to move on to running backs. And so, Devin, lay out your running backs for cash games this week.
Yeah, we got to go somewhat cheap because we're spending 6,800 at a quarterback position. I really like what I'm seeing from Rachaad White. And Tennessee's run defense, it's funny because for years they were the vaunted, like, don't start running backs against Tennessee. That really hasn't been the case this year. So, like, if I just pull up what Tennessee has done against running backs, we actually had them as one of the best matchups of the week for Tampa Bay. And they are allowing, let me just pull this up. This is my preparation that is so poorly done. Like last week, they had 157 yards rushing to Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. They allowed 5 receptions there as well. Over 100 yards to Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier combination. 165 and 2 to Zach Moss. Like Rachaad White scored 2 touchdowns last week. Is he going to do that every week? Probably not. But let's just look at receptions: 6 receptions, 7 receptions, 4 receptions. He's a guy that is basically filling the Kareem Hunt role for Baker Mayfield when Mayfield was at his peak. He's just checking the ball down, throwing to him. You're getting that 4 to 6 points pretty much guaranteed. And at 5,800, I think he's in a really good spot. 4,900, Najee Harris. I don't like Najee Harris. Like, it's hard to stomach him. The guy's he's relatively producing. I think the price is just fair. It's a relatively cheap one compared to the touches that he's getting. So, 16 carries, 69 yards and a touchdown last week against the Titans. He's caught 10 balls in his last 3 games. People want Jalen Warren to happen. It's not really happening. Like, Jalen Warren isn't all that great of a running back either. So I think he's at least intriguing. I don't know that I'll go there, but he's at least a guy that I'm going to look at. And then Joe Mixon, I think, is interesting as well against Houston. But can you really play both Burrow and Mixon? I think that's the question you're going to have to ask and answer yourself. In cash, I'm relatively okay with it. If the Bengals score 28 points and those come from Mixon / Burrow, you're probably fine. But it obviously puts all your eggs in the basket of that single team. So I don't necessarily love that, but the value is there for Mixon this week. And then it's pretty ugly out there, boys. Like it is. You're not going to do Saquon. You're probably not going to do Kamara because he's too expensive. You're avoiding I'm not touching Bijan Robinson. I don't care if other people are. Like, I I tweeted out last week that like he's mythical status because like the idea of Bijan Robinson is better than the actual player. And people look at him like, oh, he's the eighth pick of the draft. He should be in a great spot. He has 11 carries, and 1 carry in his last 3 games, and he's caught 2 total passes. He's just not like the projections I feel are just wrong across the industry as far as people are still projecting him to have this ceiling, and I just don't see it.
I think that's fair, but I think you'll see a lot of people on Pollard and Bijan this week, and we've already kind of touched on them. Phil, do you have other ones that you're targeting?
Yeah, so just talking about like the cash game construction, this is why I couldn't get to Burrow because I'm not willing to like play Najee Harris in cash. I think he's fine in GPPs. He projects pretty well, but the floor is mighty low with him splitting carries. I want Christian McCaffrey in my cash lineup, and I can't figure out how to do it with Burrow in there. But McCaffrey leads the running backs on this slate in DraftKings points per game by such a wide margin. I don't see how you don't just hit the lock button on him. He's off the bye. He had that core muscle injury. Not that it mattered in his last game. He still saw 100% of the snaps. But I don't know. The Jags are a neutral matchup. There should be some points in that game. Um, I'm playing McCaffrey. I'm playing Mixon, which, as Devin said, it at least makes me feel a little bit better playing Mixon without having Burrow in the lineup, even though I kind of agree there's nothing wrong with it if you could get up to it. So, being that those are my 2 running backs, the only other guy that I was looking at was Alexander Madison at 5,500. And at first, I was looking at him like more of a GPP play because I don't think people want to play him. But then I realized he's Alexander Madison and he stinks and he doesn't have a ceiling. But I think he does have a floor because with Cam Akers out, he'll presumably be back to that 18 to 20 touch range. And, if he fails to score, he might stick you with like 5 to 7 points, but he won't kill you. Jonathan Taylor and Deontay Foreman ran fine against the Saints in the last 2 games. So at 5,500, I think you're getting some pretty good dollar or I should say projected touch per dollar value there from Alexander Madison.
One name I like is Aaron Jones. I think that Aaron Jones, we saw last week, he looked like he's healthy again. That's right in that price range that you might just go Mixon instead. But I do think that the Packers have to go through Jones, and the Steelers have been a pretty giving offense when it comes to running backs. So that's one other name that I do kind of like. But in cash, that's about all I have, and that means that we can move over to the wide receiver position. Phil, how are you trying to build out that lineup to get Christian McCaffrey in relative to the wide receiver position?
Yeah, so I'm starting with DeAndre Hopkins at 6K. We already mentioned that we're feeling pretty good about Will Levis against that that Tampa Bay pass defense that just got torched. And, listen, even last week, I mean, everybody remembers what Hopkins did in his first game with Levis. Last week was quiet with only 10.5 DraftKings points, but underneath the hood was 30% of the targets and 40% of the air yards. That's going to play against this Tampa Bay defense. And even if he only scores 10.5 DraftKings points again, I don't think that necessarily kills you at 6K. So I'm plugging Hopkins in. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown at 8,200 is probably the best piece of that Lions Chargers game that has the highest implied total on the slate. The guy's got 15, 19, and 9 targets over his last 3 games, at least 7 targets in every game this season. And when the opposition has a legitimate wide receiver 1, the Chargers really struggle. Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, even last week, Garrett Wilson. They've been able to put up numbers. And then my third receiver for cash is Deontay Johnson at 5,400. We're just getting the best possible version of Deontay Johnson right now. He's getting a ton of targets like he always has. Only now they're not at the line of scrimmage. They're downfield. Nearly 50% of the team's air yards in each of the last 2 games. He finally got back in the end zone for the first time since Ben Roethlisberger was a quarterback. But He doesn't need the touchdown if the usage continues at 5,400. That's going to lead me to a very cheap flex, where I guess we could toss some names around later, but I'll kick it over to Devin.
Yeah, a couple names I want to talk about. What do we do with Noah Brown? Like, I think we met briefly. I think might have had him as my. I think I actually did have him as my value play of the week last week on this show. And he had quite the day. And 3,700 doesn't seem like his price is adjusted nearly enough. I would have expected him to be somewhere in that neighborhood of like 5K. Is Robert Woods back? No, not.
No.
I don't think so.
So, 6 for 153 and a touchdown last week. I think 3,700 if you want to punt the position. He's fine. Tyler Boyd is intriguing because T. Higgins is going to miss. He's not official yet, but all signs are pointing that he's doubtful at best, and Jamar Chase is going to be questionable. I do like Deontay Johnson. I think he's fine. He doesn't score enough touchdowns for me to love him, but he's fine. And then, if I just look through the rest of the wide receivers, I think Amon-Ra is okay. I would rather him not have David Montgomery because the overall passing offense for the Lions when Montgomery is in versus not is pretty night and day. So Jared Goff is averaging 233 yards with David Montgomery, 295 yards per game without David Montgomery. And it's just a different type of offense with Jahmyr Gibbs and Craig Reynolds. Like, these guys just aren't great, so they do go to a more run-heavy look. Hopkins, I think, is fine. I think Phil covered everything there. The only other name that I have is Terry McLaurin, 5,800. The guy continues to produce 70 yards or more, I believe, in like 4 or 5 straight games. So,
at CeeDee Lamb at 8,500, is that concerns about where that game could go with the Giants and him disappearing a little bit? Because
defensive touchdown, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, he has been the hottest wide receiver of the last couple weeks in the league. But 8,500 is an appetizing price, but that might be more of a GPP play. Do you guys buy Jahan Dotson at all? Or what he's been doing of late? The last couple weeks, he's looked much better, and at 5,000, he's kind of in that close to value range.
For me, it depends on if Curtis Samuel is going to play, and I think he has been practicing. But I don't think that it's a coincidence that since Samuel's been out, Dotson's been the one to kind of absorb his production. Who knows? Maybe it sticks, and maybe they figured out, hey, throwing to Jahan Dotson is actually a good thing. But I'd be leery, especially in cash. I'd be leery of going to 5K for Dotson.
All right, let's bounce over to. Go ahead.
I think I like Dotson. Trying to compare him to that range, like, yeah, Curtis Samuel's concerning, but Curtis Samuel's just not. He's not great. Like, he's just fine. He's a guy.
Yeah, I think
and
the genie's out of the bottle.
Like 5K, I think Dotson has upside that. Tyler Boyd doesn't really have upside. You feel like he's going to catch 6 passes for like 32 yards and maybe fall into the end zone. I know that's not the player he historically has been, but that's the player he is this year. And then Michael Thomas at 4,500, I said I'm not doing, and there's no way I'm going to be convinced of that. So Dotson might be my favorite 5K or less besides Noah Brown.
I would find a way to get up to Deontay Johnson. Really quickly, I had mentioned that in my build, I've only got room left for like a 3K crapper at flex. Devin, is 3,700 Noah Brown the lowest you're going? Or is there anyone else down there that you think could make it work?
It's slim pickings down there. I mean, Brandon Powell at 32, maybe. Okay. Like, he's the destination guy.
That's the guy that I have written down here. So good to get some confirmation on what is surely a horrible play.
Like, I mean, Brandon Powell, he's not a good football player. Like 2 for 15 and a touchdown, and then 1 for 10. He's very much just like the models like him, but like sort of you're not going to feel good about it. His floor is 0.
Yeah,
Where I
well,
feel like Noah Brown.
KJ Osborne should miss this week, I think, and that's kind of where my head was at. Is
Yeah.
at least he'll be on the field.
And Hawkinson is dinged up too. I don't know where he's coming in on availability, but I know that he got injured in the game as well. I think he should probably play, but I do expect that Osborne to be out. Powell was the name that I kind of circled when you started to go in that direction. So great minds, like I said. But that means that we are on to tight ends and the grossness that is the tight end position. What do you see for tight end this week on cash?
I guess I'll take it. Trey McBride, 3,500. His price didn't adjust. Kyler Murray's coming back. Clayton Tune looked out of tune. Yeah, that's
Browns
pretty bad.
defense look great again.
It's pretty bad. The Browns, completely dominated that game. But if you think about Kyler, it's who's he going to throw to, and it's Marquise Brown and Trey McBride. So yeah, he's going to be running all over the place. Maybe not because of his ACL. So McBride to me is the clear cut. I wouldn't want another guy. Yeah, I think I wouldn't even consider another guy in cash.
Yep,
Phil,
I
you
am
considering
in.
any other guys?
I'm in 100% agreement. I think the only other play I would consider is Hawkinson, but you just can't fit him with the way that the construction is. But maybe then he becomes a better play in GPPs. He had 12 targets in his first game with Josh Dobbs. I don't think that was a coincidence when you look at the way he was targeting Zach Ertz and Trey McBride earlier this year. And like Powell, he'll be a beneficiary if KJ Osborne misses.
I know we don't talk about defense. Can I talk about defense for a second?
Yeah, you can talk about defense.
Find a way to pay up for the Dallas Cowboys. Tommy DeVito is being sacked on 23% of his dropbacks. Yeah. And in college, this thing is going to be it's going to be very bad, and watch him not get sacked at all. In 2019 at Syracuse, he was sacked 44 times in 10 games, which for college is absurd. And at Illinois in his final year, he sacked 27 times. He's the same guy as he was in college, which is a 20 to 25% sack guy. And they're going to be behind. They're going to be throwing the ball. It's going to be ugly. And it's a game where, very similar to the Cleveland game last week, where you probably should have paid up for facing these rookie quarterbacks who have no chance. And Tune was like that, and DeVito is even much worse than Clayton Tune. Clayton Tune was a good college quarterback. Tommy DeVito, for those that don't follow college, it's how the hell is this guy in the NFL?
Yes.
It's who does he know on the coaching staff or in the front office to get this guy a job? Because no one, he was the worst. I don't want to say the worst. He was a bottom tier quarterback in the Big Ten last year.
I'll just say that Illinois wins the Big Ten West walking away if Tommy DeVito was not their quarterback last year, because that defense was lights out. We saw Devin Witherspoon go. I think it was 5th in the draft, and they were loaded throughout that defense, and they had Tommy DeVito as quarterback, and they did not sniff the Big Ten championship game. So that's how I think that kind of the best way to put Tommy DeVito into context coming out of college.
So he's Zach Wilson on the Jets.
No, well,
and that's not even.
Tommy
DeVito on the Giants for Illinois.
Let's put it this way: Zach Wilson is now the best quarterback in that stadium by a wide margin. It's not even close.
My goodness.
All right, let's go over. All right. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Feel free to comment with any questions on this week's slate. And then also make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. So as we're nearing the end of the year, allow Devin to make you some money and get some of that Hall of Fame content. But we're going to dive into GPPs now. We're going to look at quarterbacks. And Devin, who are your quarterback for GPP this week?
Geno Smith, 5,800 going up against Washington. Geno Smith's been up and down this year, which you don't really want to play that in cash. I think it's a guy who you want to target in a GPP setting. So Washington's 275-yard or more streak was broken last week because the Patriots have guys that like you can find at a grocery store running routes for them. And Eno has thrown for 290 yards or more in 3 games. Now his floor is awful. He's thrown for 160 or less in 3 games. But you don't really care about that. Like you don't care about the 200 or 220 yard performance. You're really looking for ceiling, or you're looking for you don't really care. So 290 or more at 5,800. He's thrown for 300 twice this year. We saw a lot last week where Washington had 0 sacks, and while Mac Jones didn't completely tear this defense apart, he had 220 yards. The concern that we had, or the reason that we liked Mac Jones, was because of the lack of pass rush on an already bad Washington secondary. 0 sacks is, I mean, Geno Smith should have all day to throw to, Metcalf, Lockett, or Smith and Jigba and create matchup nightmares throughout the game. So I think that the Seahawks get right. They're back at home after being embarrassed last week, and he has upside. And the question there is, can Washington do enough to keep this game interesting? And Sam Howell has proven that he can.
I think that's a good call. Phil, who do you have?
Yeah, I like Geno. I've got a couple of names. The first one I'm a little bit hesitant to say. It's Kyler Murray at 5,900. And the reason for my hesitation is because I think he might be overowned because he's fairly cheap for Kyler Murray, and people do like their shiny objects. They haven't had a chance to play him this year. So maybe they click on him a little bit more than they usually would. I'd probably avoid him for that reason.
Tomorrow, Friday, the official release.
What's that?
Call of Duty.
Oh no!
No.
Oh no! Don't say it.
It did have an early release though. That's why he didn't play last week. Was because he was too busy doing that. So, but yeah, officially it comes out tomorrow.
All right, he's got his pre-release
don't
copy.
Get that joke that are new, and to explain it, like Kyler Murray's stats pre Call of Duty and post Call of Duty. Pre, he's like an MVP candidate. Post, he's Tommy DeVito.
Oh boy!
This is why he has to watch film in his contract.
Yeah. I'm surprised he can't just watch it while. I mean, when I'm playing video games, I have something on the second TV too, and so I'm surprised me he just hasn't figured that out yet. But maybe he has, and maybe that explains a lot.
I think it tracks your eyes. I think the iPads are tracking whether you're actually watching it, so players can't just have it off in the background. They definitely record the time that they're watching it. So.
Well, I know because rest in peace, but Dwayne Haskins, I remember him having 0.0 minutes on the iPad when that got returned. But that's a story for another time. But all right, let's dive into running backs. And Phil, what are you going to go for running backs in your GPPs?
Okay. Really quick before we get to running backs, I just want to say why I do like Murray, and that's because the stack of Murray, Marquise Brown, and Trey McBride is super cheap. And then Arizona's defense is so bad that the bring back options on the Atlanta side are numerous, despite Arthur Smith's best efforts to ruin it for everyone. And my other guy was Derek Carr for tournaments. I think he's like the flop leg play, where everybody was expecting something big last week. It didn't happen. It was a weird offense that they rolled out last week for New Orleans. But I don't mind stacking the Saints sides this week, for the whole busted chalk theory where people are going to get off of them. So running backs, I do like your call, Jeff, on Aaron Jones. I think he won't really get too far over like the 10% range this week. And I think at that point, I'd want to at least double the field in my portfolio. The Steelers are a solid matchup. And as you said, the Packers finally figured out that giving him the ball gives them the best chance of scoring points. So as long as he, once again, is on the better side of that 60-40 split with A.J. Dillon, and he's seeing all the targets, I think he could put up at least 20 points against Pittsburgh. And then GPPs is where I'm going to play Tony Pollard. I know that he's going to be owned. It's not that he won't, but from a game theory perspective, right? If we throw away everything that has happened so far this year with Tony Pollard and the Cowboys, and some of it's been a little bit fluky, his lack of production. Some of it's been his fault. He's not playing well. But I think if we were to look at this slate and we were to say the Cowboys are 17-point favorites at home, they have a running back who has shown explosiveness in the past. He's dominating the workload in the backfield. He's 7,300. What would his percent owned be? I would say at least 35%, right? Devin has him at 17%. That's pretty consistent with what I've seen throughout the industry. So I see leverage there. I think I'm going to, for one last week, play it as though this season never happened for Tony Pollard. I'm going to go heavy. And if he costs me money, he costs me money. But I think that the odds of a huge game are in his favor. Now
Good
Devin
luck.
could tell me why I'm stupid.
No, I'm not going to tell you you're stupid. I'm just going to say good luck. I mean, at some point, like, he could pop off. I do think that the matchup is built into the price a little bit. Like, his price rose on FanDuel from 6,600 to 7,800, which makes no sense. Like, I do think they're factoring in that they're probably 14 or 17-point favorites, but that's going to cause people to. There's a reason his ownership isn't as high as it otherwise should be, because his price should be lower based on the production. So, I think it's fine. I don't really think it's a dumb play. I don't think it's a great play. Let's look at a couple guys. I think Najee is going back to Najee. I think he's a good play. Rashad White's going to be popular. It might be too popular, to be honest. Right now, I have him 25%, which is sort of crazy. A name that is going to be intriguing is David Montgomery. I have him at 3% rostered right now. And look, we've seen this movie before where, like, everyone just assumes Jahmyr Gibbs is going to come back and just have the role, even though Montgomery comes back, and everyone's like, why are they giving it to him 27 times? Is that in the realm of possibility this week? I would say unquestionably yes. And are people just writing him off because he's 6,900 and saying, I'm just not going to do that? I'm not going to take that risk. Would I go heavy there? No. But would I have him in like 5 to 10% of rosters because of that factor that he very well could be the guy that has the upside that is the sub 5% rostered player that you could look at and say he's going to be the guy that's going to carry me this week. I'm fading Bijan Robinson. I can't do it. There's no rationale, no possible reason that he's 20%, 15 to 20% rostered. I just don't. It like makes my head hurt really bad. But the other guy that I'll mention this week, I like Brian Robinson a little bit against Seattle. Like, he's actually, I think he's outscoring Bijan Robinson this season. He's 5,400, and I like points in this Washington-Seattle game. So Brian Robinson at 54 is at least intriguing.
Glad you mentioned him, because that was going to be a name that I threw in that same game. Zach Charbonnet at 4,200. If you really wanted to open up some things in your lineup,
he went to Michigan. No? I can't do it.
Okay. Well, he ran away from Michigan, though. He got out. He went to UCLA, like everybody should. But like everybody on next year's team is going to do after Jim Harbaugh leaves and goes to the NFL. But no, at 4,200, he's outsnapped Ken Walker the last 2 weeks. And so I think that's one where if they get close to the goal line, maybe Charbonnet pushes it in a couple times, and you're paying off at 4,200, opening up a lot more things in your lineup for other areas. But I don't have anybody else to mention, and that means we can do some wide receivers. Oh.
No, I'm not going to say it. Let's just keep going.
Let's do it. You
can't do that.
You got to throw it out. You got to have the flag plant there.
Keaton Mitchell at 0.2% rostered. He's at least intriguing.
Popped on the injury report today, but they also said that he earned more opportunities last week. So, yeah.
I'm not saying he's like a great play, but 9 carries, 138 yards, and a touchdown last week, and his price is 4,700, and he's less than 1% rostered. Come on, you could do worse.
Yeah, I see that. What about wide receivers? Where are you going there?
Phil can start.
Okay. I'll lead off with my evergreen GPP wide receiver advice, and that is Mike Evans. He's always too expensive to be popular with Baker Mayfield as his quarterback, but he's always in the mix to be the top scoring wide receiver on the slate. I'd be surprised if he gets much further than 5 to 7% owned. And if you look at his ceiling projection and the standard deviation in his weekly scoring, he probably has like a 10 to 12% probability of finishing as the overall wide receiver one. That just makes sense as a GPP play. Chris Olave 6,400 because I like Derek Carr. I kind of have to like Olave for a lot of the same reasons. Much has been made on Twitter this week about what's holding him back, the lack of layup targets. But in tournaments, I'm not too concerned about that. We just need it to happen in one game where one or two of those deep shots lands, and he will more than pay off. So I think he's got also a big ceiling at 6,400, and he shouldn't get too far past 10, 12, 13%. And then the last guy on my list, I don't know if I'm actually going to play this guy, so I don't know if I have too much conviction here, but I think it's worth mentioning that George Pickens is this week's squeaky wheel. So he apparently took all of the Steelers stuff off of his Instagram, and they asked Mike Tomlin about it, and Mike Tomlin said it's like having a pebble in his shoe or something like that. So he's aware of it at the very least. And usually, what that happens to a talented receiver, they do try to feed him the following week. And I think it gives some leverage from Deontay Johnson, who should be fairly popular.
Let me ask you a question. How many gloves does his quarterback wear?
2 gloves.
He wears more than 2, and I'm very impressed.
Can't start a guy who has 2 gloves as his quarterback. Wide receivers. So Brandon Ayuk, I think, is really intriguing. So guys who come off the bye seem to typically just become less rostered the next week. Like when people forget about them, there's so much just like recency bias in DFS as far as, oh my God, this guy popped. And I just did it with Keaton Mitchell. Like, so even like all of us do it. But like I said early on, Jacksonville is struggling against the pass. And it's a matchup that should be exploitable. And at 7,100, a lot of people aren't going to be on it. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, this is where I would play him. Over 100 yards in 4 of his last 6 games or something. So we've seen the Chargers secondary just be abysmal for most of the season. Tank Dell, I don't know. I think he's going to be really popular. And right now I have him at about 25% in my latest update. I get the price is good. 5,500. People are going to want someone in that matchup. But like, is there any telling it could just as easily be Nico Collins next, like again, and he's going to be 5% rostered? It just seems to me like if this game's a shootout, which people are going to want to stack it, maybe you have to go with Tank Dell because of the price of a Burrow Boyd or Burrow Chase stack, but it's at least intriguing to go down to Collins instead. And then I know the matchup is difficult, but this player is outperforming his price, and that's Amari Cooper at 6,300. With Deshaun Watson, he has 90 yards or more in each of his last 3 games with Watson. Watson looked really sharp on the deep balls last week. Didn't look so great on some of the underneath stuff that Elijah Moore. And they're dealing with some injuries. So David Bell and Marquise Goodwin are both likely to miss. So the Browns only have 3 wide receivers. They have Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, and Amari Cooper since they traded Donovan Peoples-Jones. Njoku may also miss. So who else are they going to throw to if they're behind?
Nobody. Jerome Ford. That's it.
You guys can criticize that pick because that pick is pretty risky. No,
Well, but I mean, isn't that kind of the approach to if you want to take down a GPP, kind of target some of those players that would be a risky approach, and maybe the other side of that, we got a little bit of a revenge game narrative brewing with Odell Beckham at 3,900, and Odell Beckham the last couple of weeks, outside of 2 weeks ago, has started to come on a little bit and kind of replacing Zay Flowers in that offense just a little bit, and so at 3,900, maybe that opens up some things in your build, and but that's going to be a nasty, gross game being in that division. But at the same time, I mean, I feel like I don't know. Like I always struggle to win, like especially showdown. I make a showdown lineup that makes sense, and then I see what won, and I'm like, there's no way I ever would have done that. And so it's some of those things that if you really want to win some of these larger field tournaments, you have to think about that a little bit.
we've seen games between like these. Everyone just assumes that the AFC North games are going to be like slogs, like 10-7, Iowa versus Minnesota type college football games. And we see a couple of them pop off
We
once
do.
or twice a year. And a lot of people just avoid them altogether. And I think back to it was the game where I know we're almost out of time, so I'll make it quick. The game where Lamar Jackson had to run off the field and take a use
Yes.
the restroom. That game was like 38-35 with these two teams. So maybe that's like 3 years ago at this point, but I still have that stuck in my brain that like there's a possibility that these two games could shoot out.
Well, I going even further back, like I feel like I remember Derek Anderson era Browns. They would have against the Bengals, especially. There would be one game that would be a completely unwatchable, and then one game would end up 42-39, and it would be
September
crazy.
of 2007, I was moving into my college dorm. I think it was 52-49 Browns Bengals.
Yeah, just saying. People aren't going to be there, so I
So
don't
what
have a problem
happened
at all.
16 years ago is predictive for what's going to happen in 2023.
All right, that means we need to talk about tight ends. And what do you got for tight ends?
I'm thinking that ownership should be fairly flat. So Hawkinson and McBride, who I mentioned for cash, are fine. For GPPs, the other names that look like they could score a lot of points are Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram, and Jake Ferguson. They'll also be owned, but they seem fine. I'll just throw a reminder out there that tight end is a really easy position to swerve from the field in general because it is the most volatile position next to DST. And I usually like to play a low owned tight end as part of my quarterback stack. That way, you're getting both lower ownership and stronger correlation, which are both things that help separate your lineup. So, just as an example, like if I'm playing Derek Carr and Chris Olave, I might throw in like a Jawan Johnson who should be 1% owned. And if it happens to be his week to get into the end zone twice, and the Derek Carr part of that stack comes through, then I'm in business, right? And then at that point, I could just use chalk in the rest of the lineup and be good to go. So just something to think about, right? If you're going to go contrarian, tight end's a good place to do it, and hooking a low on tight end up with your quarterback is also a good spot.
Yeah, I like Laporta. I like Logan Thomas. I think there's a number of guys you could take. You could look at like an Evan Ingram against San Francisco. Don't really love that, but that game could be a sneaky shootout in having Ingram. Could be the guy. I think he's showing upside. And then, yeah, I mean, Ferguson's fine. Laporta's fine. McBride, I would probably stay away from. I think he's going to get plus over 20%, and I think that's too high for a tight end. So, yeah, I think there's a few guys there that you could take.
the matchup's less than ideal, but at that same price point as McBride, you have Kate Otten, who's coming off a big week and has started to get a lot more involved in that offense as well. But the Titans have been one of the more difficult teams against tight end this year. What about the Taysom Hill conversation? Is that enter at all? Is it because of the non PPR involvement really for him, or he's been tight end one over the last couple weeks.
I think it's something you have to consider when you're putting a player pool together. It's not going to feel great, but hey, that's part of it, right? In tournaments, but I don't know. I usually can't bring myself to click on him, and I just kind of hate watch the Saints games and the box scores while he's going off. That seems to be my weekly routine.
Yeah, I can't. I can't do it. Even if he like runs for a touchdown, he could have 7 points based off like 15 yards rushing. I don't know. He's fine. If you wanna take a chance and like you're a Saints fan, fine. I don't know.
If you
I
like
don't
the
know.
team and you wanna have fun while you're watching them, go ahead.
Yeah,
And
if you're watching the game, I think it's fine. But like, I'm not.
It is
I want to
so
start
interesting
somebody who's
to
going to catch the ball.
to have a tight end that's
maybe on FanDuel where the point per reception is much less impactful.
They
But
priced him up there.
did they? That's not a surprise.
7,000 right next to Mark Andrews.
Yeah, never mind.
Yeah. Yeah, all right. Well, that leaves stacks of the week. And what are our favorite stacks of the week? Devin, who are you stacking this week?
Yeah, I think Burrow Boyd for me is probably going to be a way that I'm going. Instead of Burrow Chase, the back injury for Chase does worry me a little bit. I think Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin. I talked about Geno a little bit already. Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk. I've talked about that one a little bit as well. And then let's get a little weird. Taylor Heineke, Drake London, Trey McBride.
That is weird.
That's actually interesting because taking the other side of that game is probably not something a lot of people are going to do. So
It's
I
a
do
way to
like the game.
differentiate yourself from the McBride side. So
Yeah, I like that.
Phil, what's your favorite?
Mine was Goff, Amon Ra, and Montgomery, and just do a little bit of a Lions onslaught and hope that you get all of the touchdowns between Goff and Montgomery and all of Goff's production through Amon Ra. And then you bring it back with Keenan Allen on the other side, who is really the only viable target anymore in the Chargers passing game.
For me, it's difficult to see the performance from CJ Stroud last week and knowing that Will Levis is going up against Tampa and seeing how heavily targeted DeAndre Hopkins has been with Levis and the value that Levis can unlock in your lineup at 5,300. So that's one that I circle. And then I like Sam Howell, and I'm buying what Jahan Dotson has done. So at 5,900 and then 5,000 for Jahan Dotson, I like that stack as well. Now that means that the only thing left is our discount plays of the week. And Phil, what are you discount playing this week?
Well, we've said the words Trey McBride probably more than any other two words that we've said on this podcast so far. But if you're asking like who is the best value play on this slate, I think it's McBride, and that is including all of the quarterbacks on a point per dollar basis. I think he is just mispriced thanks to the Clayton Tune thing last week, and I think we'll probably end up seeing something in the middle of when he went off 2 weeks ago and how he kind of stunk last week with a floor because he had a quarterback that couldn't throw the ball.
Yeah, for me, it's Tyler Boyd. I think that, I know he's only averaging 8 yards per reception this year, but, you look at his past and, if we pull it up, he's at 11.7 career yards per catch guy. So I think with T Higgins out, he could be in for a decent week. I don't know that he's going to have like 130 yards and 2 touchdowns or have Noah Brown type performances like last week, but he could get 70, 80 yards and get a touchdown and get 20 points off of 4,600. Sure, why not?
Mine's going to be Zach Charbonnet at 4,200. I like that price relative to the rest of the running back field. Like I said, he's been outpacing Ken Walker on snaps, and I think that game is going to shoot out a little bit with Washington's lack of defense that allows that to happen usually against them. We saw Ramondre Stevenson have a big run against them last week, get him back on pace a little bit. So Zach Charbonnet finds the end zone as discount play of the week for me. So that's going to be it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Devin, do you have any comments to lead us out with?
No, I think we if you pick the Zach Charbonnet breakout game, you need to buy some lottery tickets. So yeah, I think he's fine. He just hasn't done it yet. The snaps are certainly trending in the right direction, but yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Good luck this week, everybody.